Tonight on Politicat, send them to sanctuary cities, Trump's controversial idea for immigration.
And from City Hall to the Oval Office, we check in on the 2020 race and one mayor's meteoric rise in the polls.
Plus, Assange's implications, why the WikiLeaks co-founder could cause problems for free press.
Those stories and more tonight on Politicat.
It's your politics right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Joey Safchik.
And I'm Justin Sweet with lots of news to get to, so let's get right into it. Presidential candidate Bernie Sanders released his tax returns Monday, revealing that he too is part of the 1%. Sanders earned over $1 million in 2017, which he attributes to the sales of his best-selling book. Several other major Democratic candidates also released their tax returns this week, including Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and Beto O'Rourke. Disclosing tax returns was once standard practice for major candidates, but President Trump broke this tradition when he kept his returns private during his 2016 run. He has also not released his returns for this year.
A redacted version of Robert Mueller's report will be released Thursday, according to an official from the Justice Department. It will be made available to Congress and the public. The investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election concluded late last month. A summary report from the Attorney General indicated President Trump's associates were not involved in a criminal conspiracy with Russia in 2016. It was inconclusive on whether there was any obstruction of justice.
Freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar says death threats against her have spiked since President Trump tweeted a video that juxtaposed her speaking with graphic footage of 9/11. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said she has asked Capitol Police for extra protection for Omar. Trump and some other critics have accused Omar of downplaying the significance of 9/11 in a speech condemning Islamophobia. She has also faced criticism recently for her comments on U.S.-Israel relations that some viewed as anti-Semitic.
Ohio has banned abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected, which is around 6 weeks. There are no exceptions for rape or incest. The ACLU is suing to stop the bill from going into effect in July. Ohio would join 5 other states with similar so-called heartbeat bills.
In a series of tweets last week, President Trump proposed releasing undocumented immigrants into sanctuary cities. The move appears to be aimed at his political opponents. He tweeted, quote, "The radically left should be very happy about the policy." White House officials had considered and rejected the idea twice. They said it was meant to alleviate overcrowding in shelters in border cities where migrants are caught and usually released. But Acting Deputy Director of ICE, Matthew Albin, said the department's budget hadn't been allocated for transporting detainees. He also worried that the government could be liable if migrants were injured during the transportation. The idea's legality is also in question. There's a lot to unpack there. We'd like to welcome in our panel to discuss. We have Dominic Bayer of the NU College Republicans and Mia Mamone, Editor-in-Chief of North by Northwestern. Thanks for joining us. So Dominic, detainees are normally released at border cities. What kind of impact do you think transporting them would have?
I think the logistical impact wouldn't really be as great as it's being depicted. I mean, sure, there will be costs and logistical difficulties associated with the transportation, but I think that's really not the big issue in this whole kerfuffle.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously, it will cost more money to transport the people to the sanctuary cities. An interesting thing I think a lot of people have brought up is if the president would like this to kind of be some payback to his Democratic opponents in Congress and whatnot. People pointed out this would just be putting undocumented immigrants in places where it would be easier for them to establish lives in the United States with less opportunity to be deported or detained in other ways.
Now, some critics, like Senate Democrat Ben Cardin, have accused Trump of using immigrants as pawns in this plan. What do you think of that?
I think that sounds pretty accurate. It seems that there isn't much reason to take them and move people such long distances from the border to various sanctuary cities. And certainly comments that Trump has made regarding his Democratic opponents in Congress, I would certainly find that it could be maybe more of a rivalry than actual reason.
Yeah, I'm actually inclined to agree on that point. I think this whole issue is just political theater. It's designed to keep the whole immigration issue in the news. And because I believe that President Trump thinks that this is a winning issue for him, and he wants to keep it in the media and keep attention on the issue to kind of keep his base energized, especially with the 2020 primaries coming up.
Well,
Yeah.
that was my next question, is what role do you think the impending campaign plays in all of this?
I think it does play some role because Trump's already started thinking about his reelection. But I think it's not so much about the election, which is still, I don't know, like a year and a half away. It's more about the media cycle, and I think President Trump really likes being in the media cycle. He likes dominating it. He likes it being centered around him. So he kind of feels the need when there's nothing really controversial. He feels the need to pick some issue, make some decision that's going to kind of galvanize the opposition, galvanize his base, and keep him in the news. So I kind of feel like that's essentially what's happening.
Yeah, I definitely think both are true. I think he wants to remain in the media, and I also think this is certainly preparation for 2020. It is very early, but as we've seen, all the major Democratic candidates that are announcing their runs and gaining popularity, I think it's as good a time as any for him to kind of pull a stunt.
Now, Trump's tweets came a day after his administration said it was no longer considering the proposal. Why do you think he resurrected the idea, and why now?
I mean, who can say, honestly? Obviously, the Trump administration is very volatile. I think there's a lot going on in the news with his administration, his comments about Representative Omar, just lots of things. So maybe a distraction, trying to get his base, like Dominic said, galvanized again. It could be anything.
I think Trump really likes the attention to be centered around him, and he likes to send the message that he's in charge. So I think this is a pattern where his administration says, oh, we're no longer considering this, and then he'll go in 1 day, 2 days later, and he'll say, oh yeah, we're doing it after all, to kind of show I'm the boss. I'm not just following what my advisors are telling me to do. I'm the one who's making the decisions.
So Kirstjen Nielsen resigned just last week. What direction do you think this is going to take U.S. border policy in?
I feel like in the short run, it's just going to mean a more unbridled Trump. I feel like something that Secretary Nielsen was able to do, she was kind of able to rein in Trump in a big part. But besides that, I think it really matters on who he nominates to be the next Homeland Security Secretary. I think that person will help determine whether it's just going to become kind of crazy as we've seen in the past, or whether it's going to be a more restrained, more logical immigration policy.
Yeah, I don't know if it will actually do anything right away if he tries to enact it, and I think there will be immediate pushback from states that have sanctuary cities. Just thinking of like the anti-commandeering doctrine, which has been used in years past to basically give states protection against federal manipulation for enforcing things within more local jurisdictions. So I think even if he tries to start getting things in motion, there will be a lot of pushback, and I don't think anything will happen right away.
All right, thanks, Mia. We'll leave it right there, and we'll be right back.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back to Politicat. Now let's send it over to Justin, who is standing by for this week's Money Minute.
The 2020 presidential election might be a little over a year and a half away, but campaign season is in full swing, and that'll be the topic of this week's Money Minute. First quarter fundraising totals have been reported for the 2020 candidates, with President Trump leading the pack at $30 million raised. Only one other candidate has collected more than half that mark, with Bernie Sanders at $18.2 million. 84% of that money came from small donations of $200 or less, coming out to over $15 million. Beto O'Rourke is next closest on the small donor leaderboard, standing at $5.5 million. Kamala Harris is second amongst Democrats, having raised $12 million, and it is her, Sanders, and Trump alone who have amassed double-digit million-dollar war chests. Meanwhile, Pete Buttigieg has made it clear that although he's a small-town mayor, people are still willing to believe in him. His $6.4 million pickup puts him fourth among Democrats, ahead of Senators Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, and Kirsten Gillibrand. And despite the crowded field, Joe Biden is still lurking in the 2020 backdrop. He has yet to announce that he's actually running, but does lead many early polls. And despite obviously being behind in fundraising, he's in great shape to contend. At this point in 2007, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama had each raised over $25 million, but there are no Democrats close to that mark this time around. Perhaps people are just sitting at home, patiently waiting next to their wallets for the former vice president to officially announce he's in. That's all for this week's Money Minute. Back to Joey.
Thanks, Justin. Now, the election is still almost a year and a half away, but already 18 Democrats have thrown their hats into the ring. Some of these were expected, recognizable names like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but others are new to the national political scene, like South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg, who officially announced his candidacy on Sunday, came onto the scene earlier this year when he announced his exploratory committee. While he started out as a virtual unknown polling at the bottom of the field, he's quickly risen to a spot in the upper half of the polls. During his announcement on Sunday, Buttigieg said his campaign would be based on freedom, security, and democracy. To dive deeper into this, I'd like to welcome back our panel. So what is it about Buttigieg? What has people so enthralled?
I think there are a lot of things. I think he's very young. He's 37, I believe, which is quite remarkable for a presidential candidate. He is a veteran. He's a Harvard grad. He has been a mayor. He's been involved in local government. I think he really wants to take an anti-Trump stance, and I think he's just young and fresh, and that makes a lot of people excited.
Yeah, I think in many ways he's an antithesis to President Trump. He's a very well-educated, very charismatic, kind of very agreeable young man. Kind of there's a really big generational gap, kind of what Mia mentioned earlier. And I feel to many people who are just sick and tired of all like the negative aspect of American politics right now, especially President Trump, I think he kind of represents something different. And I think that's why he's been surging in the polls.
Dominic, do you think this momentum is sustainable? Will he be able to actually keep up the support, or will we expect him to trail off once the primaries actually begin?
I mean, you never know. Back in the day, people didn't think Barack Obama stood any chance against Hillary Clinton because she was a more experienced, better-known candidate. And my inclination would be to say the same about Buttigieg in relation to Biden. But you never know. Like, you can always have surprises. Nobody thought at this point in time 4 years ago that President Trump would stand a chance in the Republican nomination. Maybe it is what the Democrats really want right now. But it's way too early.
The situation a few years ago with President Obama, it was a bit different because he had already had about $25 million raised, similar to Hillary Clinton. Buttigieg is way behind that, but there's just this initial buzz and excitement behind him. Do you think this is just a new way, a new path forward for the Democratic Party?
I think it's quite possible. I think there are a lot of very, I'd say younger progressive Democrats who are a little disillusioned that Bernie Sanders is running again. I think some people think that he kind of had his time and that, they want something new and fresh. So I think it's certainly possible. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens if and when Joe Biden comes into the race. But I wouldn't put it past Democrats, and I wouldn't, underestimate Buttigieg.
Now on to another notable name. Beto O'Rourke has been making a big deal about his campaign not taking any money from PACs. However, as a congressman, O'Rourke was one of the top receivers of donations from the oil and gas industry. Now, Dominic, do you think this is going to cause major damage for his image and his campaign?
I don't really think so. I feel like there's too many people running at this point, and there's too much information out there for this thing to actually hurt him too much in the polling.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I also think he's from Texas, so that might be expected to some extent, even though he is a Democrat. I think there's so much going on. I don't think this will be too big of a deal.
Now, what role do you think social media plays in this particular campaign in igniting the younger demographic that you were talking about?
I think it plays a huge role. There have been so many photos on Twitter of Beto skateboarding and standing on tables and talking, and a lot of people think that's really cool. And I've been impressed by some stuff he said, but more than anything, I think he just does seem very approachable and seems very fun. So I think that'll help him a lot.
Do you think Beto and Pete Buttigieg might cancel each other out because they're both these young Democrats that are appealing to a base that previously hadn't really been appealed to the degree they are?
I'm not sure. I think time will tell more, but I don't know. It might end up kind of going more geographic differences with people, as O'Rourke is from Texas, Buttigieg from Indiana. I don't know. I think they are very similar in some ways, but I guess as we get more details about their specific visions and platforms and stuff, people can make up their minds.
And as of yesterday, President Trump has a Republican challenger. Do we think he stands a chance?
He doesn't stand a chance. I mean, he's going to do really well if he gets more than 5% of the Republican primary vote. I think tons of Republicans, myself included, will grumble about President Trump, but I think Republicans know that he's the only viable option in the general election, and they really don't want a divisive primary right now. So, I mean, there might be a couple of protest votes for Weld, but he doesn't have the profile to actually challenge President Trump.
Do you think he knows that?
I think he kind of knows that. It's more like he wants to stay in the media cycle and kind of maybe have like a protest candidacy. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think among Democrats, they have all these options, which is great because a lot of them can get very caught up on certain things, and not to generalize, but I think overall it does seem that Republicans do want to maintain control of the executive branch, and if that means, re-electing President Trump for better or worse, how they feel about him, I think they might do that.
Now, who do you think Trump wants to see next November? Do you think he wants to see a more conventional, traditional candidate like Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders? Or do you think he would do better? Do you think he thinks he would do better against one of these young guys like Beto or Pete Buttigieg?
Honestly, I think he might think that he would do better against someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren because he can pull, the whole, they're hypocrites, they're these, wealthy, older people, they're, kind of in some ways antithetical to what the young Democrats want, what young people seem to want. And he might be worried, this is complete speculation, about someone like Buttigieg kind of coming up out of nowhere in the same way he did and challenging him.
I think the dream candidate for him would be Bernie Sanders. If you've paid attention to the messaging, it's all about socialism. And I think Bernie would just serve it on a gold platter for Trump to use in the general election campaign. I think his nightmare would be Vice President Biden, who's a more moderate and who has a lot of credibility among blue-collar Americans, especially in the Rust Belt, which was decisive for President Trump.
Now, you said something earlier how Pete Buttigieg was just very agreeable. Now, this is just an objective stance that a lot of people have. Do you think that Buttigieg might be a more formidable opponent than a Biden, just because what is Trump going to attack him on? Like during the 2016 campaign, there's a lot of dirt on Hillary Clinton. He could say this, he could say that. What is there to say about Buttigieg other than the fact that he has a lack of experience with, which is what President Trump had as well?
Yeah, the thing is, I think the name recognition for Buttigieg is too low at this point, and we don't have enough information about his past. Like for Joe Biden, all of his past stuff has already been dredged up, but you never know if there's something kind of lurking in Buttigieg's background. So maybe he would be the ideal candidate for the Democrats, but I think he still needs to run the election in order for us to figure out what's in his past.
And Mia, do you think there's been enough talk of policy yet?
I honestly don't know if there has been. I think a lot of what people have been commenting on so far is just overall appearance, agreeability, how well they respond to crowds and, their opening rallies and everything. I would definitely like to hear more from every single candidate, for sure.
All right, we'll leave it there. We'll be right back.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
We know the news can be sometimes overwhelming, so we'd like to catch you up on some stories you might have missed. Chinese authorities are using facial recognition technology to track Uyghurs, a mostly Muslim minority group in China's western region. According to the New York Times, the Chinese government is holding as many as 1 million Uyghurs in detention camps, but the use of artificial intelligence to find and track them based on their appearance represents the large role technology can play in racial profiling. Experts said this is the first known time that a government is using AI for the purpose of racially profiling people.
President Trump called former President Jimmy Carter to talk about U.S.-China diplomatic relationships over the weekend. Carter said this was the first time they had spoken, and Trump was especially concerned about China surpassing the U.S. economically. Carter initially revealed this information in a Sunday school lesson at his church, and it was later confirmed in a statement from the White House.
The Ukrainian presidential runoff has faced a series of unorthodox twists. On the 14th, during what was supposed to be a presidential debate, Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko ended up speaking alone to an audience after his opponent, Volodymyr Zelensky, did not show up. Zelensky reportedly never agreed to that date for the debate. Now, Zelensky is a comedian and plays a president on TV, but has no political experience. The runoff is set for April 21st.
A task force created by the Kenyan government is suggesting that the government recognize intersex people on official documentation and the census. Their recommendation follows about 2 years of consultations and campaigns in Kenya regarding discrimination against intersex people. If the recommendations become law, Kenya will be the first African country to legally recognize intersex people.
And to end our panel tonight on a fun note, we're playing the game we introduced back in March, Head Lies. We'll read you 3 headlines, 2 of them fake, 1 of them real. You figure out which is real. Now, are you guys ready?
Yep.
Just one thing before we start. Justin didn't do his
I
homework.
don't know. No, I did do my homework. I was not included in this
Justin
game, so I don't know.
Justin is playing along.
Okay. All right, first. While Notre Dame Cathedral burned in Paris on Monday, the University of Notre Dame had to tweet a clarification that the fire was in Paris and not South Bend, Indiana. Next, in response to claims that Sunday's snow was in mid-April was more physical proof of the effects of climate change, President Trump tweeted it was no big deal and, quote, it was great for skiers and ski resorts. And finally, in an interview before the Game of Thrones premiere on Sunday, President Trump said he was, quote, impressed by that character Cersei. She's got some good ideas on how to run a country.
Dominic has his thinking face on.
I'm going to go with the Notre Dame one.
All right, as the truth?
Yeah.
That's also what I was leaning toward. I think the Trump tweet could also be possible, but I think the Notre Dame is probably most likely.
All right, Joe, you think I didn't do my homework, but I was just excluded from this game, so why don't you reveal to us
Well, what's
the
your
answer?
guess?
The guess?
You don't get out of it.
I don't think he's a fan of Game of Thrones.
I don't.
I'm a big
I don't think Justin's a fan of games.
Okay. All right. I think Notre Dame. Notre Dame?
You are all correct.
Okay, there we go.
Good job.
Okay.
Okay, vast improvement from last time when nobody got anything right. Okay, we'll give you another go at it. Here's round 2. Option 1. In a Supreme Court fashion brand case, the name of the involved brand is so similar to a vulgar word that some justices have refused to use the name throughout the entire case. Okay, option 2. In response to critiques about his personal wealth, Bernie Sanders said, quote, at least I haven't been bankrupt 7 times in a thinly veiled attack on President Trump's financial history. And option 3, Congress people have raised concerns about the upcoming release of the Mueller report about the sheer amount of black ink that will be used to redact the report. I think this is an environmental concern. Guesses?
It's option 1. The trademark is FUCT.
I was going to say I saw that as well, given Ruth Bader Ginsburg's comments on it on Twitter. Not that she made on Twitter, I saw them on Twitter, but yeah, it is the first one.
I'm going to also go with the first one.
Oh, wow. Aren't you intelligent? It is the first one. You all do your homework. Thanks for playing along. We'll be right back.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange was arrested at the Ecuadorian embassy in London on Friday. Assange had been seeking asylum in the embassy since 2012. The UK now must decide whether to extradite Assange to the United States, where he faces a charge of conspiracy for accessing classified information from the Department of Defense in 2010.
But this isn't just a national security issue. It's a free speech issue as well. Assange was once seen by many as a champion of free speech, but his reputation was complicated when he released unredacted classified documents in 2010, a move that government officials said endangered the lives of those involved in the documents. This violates standard journalistic practices against putting people in danger, making it harder to defend his actions.
He also allegedly asked Chelsea Manning, the former U.S. Army intelligence analyst previously convicted for her involvement in the incident, for classified information and tried to help her obtain it. Neither of those actions are normal for journalists. However, free speech advocates have raised concerns this week that his arrest could have implications for press freedom in the future. The Committee to Protect Journalists says connecting the hacking of the DoD systems to the distribution of information could leave the door open for the prosecution of journalists who publish classified information.
Whether Julian Assange is seen as a friend or an enemy of the American people, his case has the potential to influence the rights of legitimate journalists. Beyond the security implications of his case, that makes this story one worth following, as Assange faces extradition. That's all the time we have for tonight. I'm Joey Safche.
And I'm Justin Sweetwood. Thanks for watching.